And with that, I invite the PM. The floor is yours.
Cool. PY being exclusively in the chat. I'll take someone around the fifth minute. Yeah. I'm audible, right?
Yes, you are.
Three, two. Opening government has two very simple arguments. First, why saving Lana is important for you, both emotionally and for your love. And secondly, why it is just the case this is important in the fight against evil. I want to first start by explaining why Lana's love is unique for Clark. We would posit that romantic love is unique in a way parental or any of the friends is not. And this specific form of romantic love is incredibly unique compared to any other relationships that you have. Firstly, we would posit that you've been of the same age. You similarly understand the world and its struggles, and you've literally spent tons of times together at the point where you've been in school together. Secondly, we would posit that this is literally one of your childhood friends at the point where you've spent significant amounts of time in school with you. They are literally your classmate and follow the same career. They see how you've changed over a long time period. They've seen how you grow and know you significantly better than the average person. Thirdly, obviously being in love is a deeply intimate emotion. The fact that you have at things, the fact that you've been super vulnerable or intimate, she knows you in a way that Jonathan and Martha never can. Why is it incredibly hard to find any other relationships of equivalent quality? Firstly, there's a massive amount of trauma from literally seeing the woman who said we would be your wife dying in a car accident. You often tend to take yourself and say, hey, I am not going to engage because to the extent that it is true that one of my lovers died, I'm likely to be in significant amounts of grief. Secondly, you obviously blame yourself because you know you could have saved her and that you consistently made the decision to prioritize your father. So to that extent, you feel very, very guilty and are unlikely to be able to engage in future relationships. But thirdly, it's obviously just difficult to find a partner, guys. You're not compatible with tons of people. And especially not as Superman, when it is just the case that you cannot trust your identity immediately to someone. You need to be not only compatible, but you need to have a similar life outlook, understand very deeply what the other want. This means it is very unlikely that you're going to find someone similarly in love with, and therefore it is the case that Lana is particularly unique. Why would Jonathan be okay with the trade-off? And why is it the case that you do not have the same degree of obligation to him? Firstly, we would posit that he's literally your father. So to the extent that parents care about their children, we would say that he believes in your happiness, even over other life saves. That is to say, he would be happy with more people dying if it means a superhuman has as your superhuman life has a higher chance of being actively good. That's why parents sacrifice their entire lives for their kids. That's why my parents go to work to buy me the best things that they possibly can in the first place. But we would also posit that this is specifically unique point where he knows Lana is literally your lover, someone who you've actively proposed to. She's been in a romantic relationship with you in an extended period, probably, at the point where you're literally trying to propose to her. So it is obviously the case that you probably introduced her to your parents, talked to her about it. And to that extent, we would say Jonathan would be okay with it at the point where he knows this. Secondly, just on a very brutalistic level, Jonathan is relatively old and is probably going to die significantly sooner than Lana. So, to the extent that that's true, we would posit that it's just the case that importance of preserving your life and your happiness is more important to him. Parents tend to sacrifice their happiness for children. Claim the moral obligation because that is probably going to be the main attack here. There are three ways we would say the moral obligation does not matter within this space. Firstly, it is just true that the action and action distinction doesn't exist. That is, that at the point where you literally have the ability to reverse time, you are the one responsible, at least in your head and at least in your guilt, that you caused the death of either Lana Lang or Jonathan in the first place. So to that extent, I would posit that the action and action distinction doesn't exist. Secondly, you're more directly responsible for Lana's death. You literally told her to break up with Lex. You hate Lex, and she had an argument with him because of you. That means the speeding and other things that happened were literally because of you. To the extent that she died in a painful, blown-out car accident and literally damaged and harmed her. Comparatively, we would say that Jonathan is at home, surrounded by loved ones. Actually, slow is a quick, speedy death versus the massively painful death on their side of the house. Thirdly, your obligation to Lana is higher than that, Jonathan. She has a longer life to live and more experiences that are variable, versus Jonathan is older. But we would also posit that you opted into this relationship of equality, versus being adopted by parents who necessarily didn't pick you to the same extent. You didn't consent into the relationship with Jonathan and Martha, but you did to the relationship with Lana. So to that extent, we would posit that this obligation matters more. Does closing have a PY? Opening.
Yeah, if your girlfriend is kind of talking to your ex best friend despite the fact you're not okay with it, was she really a good girlfriend?
Yeah, I would posit that you deeply love her. And obviously, you've told her she was responsible for it. He was Lux's ex. She's only going to go cut off ties with him because you asked her to. That's what's happening right now. Like, come on, this is exactly the debate. Anyway, I want to now explain why, even if this relationship doesn't succeed, there are two specific ways that this is particularly important. Firstly, this allows you to set up a relationship and have good relationships within the long term. Notably, on the comparative on our side of the house, we would say that it is just likelier that you're able to build up future relationships and have significantly better outcomes on our side of the house. That is to say, that you often feel a significant amount of catharsis. This is literally your wife, the person you wanted to write a future with. And even if it is the case that she's not the best girlfriend that you've had, Clark Kent is an irrational person when given this decision. The fact that he has to choose when he is massively in love, when he's literally irrational and thinking about all the hormonal changes that he's undergoing, we would posit he sees it with rose-colored glasses to that extent. Secondly, we would just note that Lana is a much more long-term choice than Jonathan. That is to say that you are just able to build up a future life and have significantly more emotional support versus Jonathan, who's already imparted the maximum degree of emotional support he could on their side of the house. Finally, though, this is just important for your mental health in the long term. When you blame yourself and consistently guilt yourself over Lana and think you cannot save people, that massively harms you, gives you a significant amount of grief, and that's particularly harmful. We think this love is particularly unique and important to Clark Kent. Secondly, why is it better for your long-term goal of fighting evil? To be clear, you're not going to stop fighting evil in either world. Why? Because obviously you've been fighting supervillains so far, and that means it's likely to continue. Also, you're a good person. Others cannot do this to the extent that you have, to the extent that you're a superhuman, so you're literally the only one capable of fighting supervillains in their side of the house. Why do you currently not have sufficient resolve? Jonathan and your mom tell you not to. Notably, comparatively, when Jonathan dies, this influence is removed. So, and Lana is much likelier to support you in your supercrime fighting endeavors because not only is she a journalist, but she also has relatively similar values to you. That is to say that journalists are often expected to undertake significant amount of risks, especially investigative ones, in their field, and often have to engage in reporting to a much larger extent. So she's much likely to support crime fighting endeavors. Why is this particularly important in two specific ways? First, you're just likely to train a lot more, which means that you can actually stop crime on our side of the house. This means that you're likely to train better, be better prepared for when a supervillain shows up on our side of the house. But secondly, you're also able to make harder decisions much easily, like actively corroborate with the police, or make decisions like when to intervene. Notably, on our side of the house, because you've made such a difficult decision, like actively sacrificing your father, we would posit that your ability to make decisions increases. The way to this argument is incredibly simple. On their side of the house, the chance of dying or getting injured in a supervillain fight is much larger at the point where you haven't trained as much, where you haven't talked against the fight to evil, but we'd also posit this is better for the rest of the world on our side of the house. Very bad.
I thank the PM for the great speech and invite the LO to continue, start the opposition case. Here.
Hi, can I confirm I'm audible and visible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I usually don't do this, so I do want to do this. Probably a couple of quick thank yous. Firstly to Muzi, because we've debated a lot together. And we keep talking so constantly about debate. It's always been very fun. We usually end up like in a dynamic where like I have very few thoughts in prep, and he usually just like says and runs everything. So it's been pretty chill. Secondly, I think most people in this room, I feel I've at least known a lot of you. I've seen some of you. I probably respect. I've seen most of you debate, and I've respected all of you. Pretty fun stuff. And finally, I think for the motion as well, because I know several people have built, well, several people on Cap have been like, are you going to like the motion? Are you going to like the motion? And I do like the motion. So it's okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1, go. The most important priority to Clark is the morality and the fact that he's indulging in a far more immoral action inside opposition than on our side. Why is this more important than personal relationships to him? It is more important for him for three reasons. First of all, because he's already had a revealed preference for it. Despite his parents actively telling him not to do things like, put himself in harm's danger, not to try and go and always be a superhero and save people, he's chosen to, for his 20s, to actively consider doing that, even though he has a job as a journalist, even though he in many instances has limited amount of time to spend with his friends and with his family. He still chooses to spend endless amounts of hours concentrating in a super fight against many different supervillains and run the risk of his death. Secondly, because of Op's own mechanism, the fact that he's been grown up thinking that to be kind and helpful and be human is in many instances to care for other people and save them in many instances. But thirdly, because quite often he can see his family members in every person he's saving. Every father or mother he saves is like John and Martha Kent to some other child. Every woman he saves is like Lana Kent in many instances to him. This means he often has a stronger obligation to his morality. And there were many ways we won on morality. The first way wasn't resolve. The argument we made over here is very simple. The infostat caveats that your resolve is going to strengthen in the long term. It is going to be a very significant difference in strength. And the reason is because on opposition, it's very easy to just constantly dive into how inconvenient it is, right? You cannot build up relationships or friendships at the job or meeting people after work because you're constantly worried you have to go out there and save someone. Yet you already choose to do so, which means you prioritize being a crime fighter as compared to going out and trying to spend more time in your relationships in many instances. But secondly, I think what this means, however, is every time you are guilt tripped by someone to try and spend time with them instead of going and saving someone, every time you, for example, don't put your maximum amount of effort or energy because you just feel a little too tired, every time you decide not to spend an extra night training, that in many instances is a life lost. And over the lifetime of Superman, who's extremely long lasting and long living, it is a huge number of lives that often on opposition is lost as compared to on our side of the house. When you train a lot harder, when you spend far more time, like even less time, probably spending time with your friends or with your family, if in many instances you actively like quit your job as a journalist and just go out and crime fight a lot more, that is something that happens a lot more because of the resolve that is increased drastically. The thousands of lives you save, panel, is worth just way more than the one Jonathan Kent that opposition is trying to save. And crucially, right, the only thing that has stopped you right now from doing your very best is, as the info slide suggests, that the people you love, the emotional boundaries that are overriding your logical instinct to try and save as many people, the fact that Jonathan and Martha Kent are telling you, do not go out there, think of your obligation to us, we don't want to lose you in many instances. That has been the main thing that has prevented you from working as hard as you can to save as many lives as you can. And this ought to be the metric you judge this round, right? Because I think utilitarianism is far more important than any like random deontological, like, you know, obligation you have to people. Because one, in many instances, it's quite random which type of people happen to be born as your parents. You cannot consent into that action in many instances. And the point then is this, right? Any person you choose to, like, any person you happen to let die is a thing, they also have their own familial and friendly obligations to their children in many instances, which means it's not clear why your parent is more morally important to the world as compared to any other person. And you think this because you already have a preemptive obligation towards caring or being about a superhero, which means in many instances the obligations towards other people matter a lot less than yours to your family. Even if it means your life feels a lot worse, even if it means you don't get the relationship you want, that's still okay. But it's still going to win even on relationships anyways, right? The other reason I think utilitarianism is more important is because, like, I feel a lot of deontological stuff are like a little incoherent. Like, the problem with a lot of deontological argumentation is like they presume, for example, like the universalizable rule, right? Like we don't want to live in a world where nobody is honest. It's kind of like a bit presumptuous because we don't know what always is inside people's head, which is why it's far better to value what people always like, which is probably to not die and maximize for saving as many lives as you can, as composed to something that's a lot more like a subjective than like deontology. But I'm going to win in the relationships anyways, right? Because there's so much slander towards poor old Lana. One, the info slide does not say that she's your first girlfriend. There's no reason why she is. And in many instances, she likely is not. Because if you think this is somebody whom you have proposed to marry, and presumably, if you care about your parents, you've asked your parents, is this something I should do? And they've said yes, because that's the reason why you would go to Lana, then that must suggest they think she is a good, responsible person for you who's willing to help you. So I don't think it's going to be so bad. But secondly, she has literally died because she went to cut off Lex. Like, I honestly feel that, honestly, it's a little kind of like cringe. Like, I don't like the idea that, you know, anyone that my friend is going to tell me to like cut off exes from my life in whatever way, shape, and fashion because they have some insecurity. It's not even apparent to me that like she's definitively in the wrong and he's definitely in the right, but she's doing it anyways. She has listened to him reveal his identity. She's accepted the proposal. She has gone and had a huge heated argument with Lex Luthor. And crucially, even if she has some like connection to Lex Luthor, they just had a huge heated argument. So clearly she doesn't like him as much. So it's not very clear why she's suddenly going to like, you know, leave you or always go back to him in many instances. It's far more likely she's happy to cut off and stay with you. Why is this important, more important than Jonathan? And there's so much Op doesn't respond to. The first ballot is nothing about whether you are happier with Jonathan or with Lana, because probably Jonathan has a unique part of your life, but so does Lana, right? She's the only relationship who's known you from childhood. She's the only person whom you're deeply vulnerable with, right? She's someone who's your age, knows your slang, knows your language, is also a journalist like you, has had sex with you, so is deeply vulnerable with you. I don't think you can replace that on either side. But one, you have a greater obligation to Lana than to Jonathan. And there's so much music gives you that's not responded to. The fact that Jonathan is far more okay with dying, you know, with dying in order to save Lana if he knew. Of course, he's not going to know. Very clearly, this is just an action you will take, and you'll never want to reveal this to anybody else in order to avoid like any emotional anger or distress from them, right? And so But the point that I'm trying to make here is that Jonathan would be okay with it because he deeply cares about you preemptively. And the reason he cares about you super preemptively is because, he is somebody who's already exhibited, like, he is someone who's literally said, all the lives that you could be saving are not worth preserving your own life, which is why you shouldn't spend so much time being a superhero, which suggests he sacrifices your life to a very large extent over anything else. But there are also other independent reasons why Jonathan is a less morally valuable life than Lana's, right? One, in many instances, he already is far older, so he often has a lot less time left to live as compared to Lana, who lives a very long period of time. Two, Lana's death is far more painful. She's going to die in a painful crash that may not immediately kill her, which means she's going to face trauma and sadness. Whereas Jonathan has a quick heart attack, most likely at his home in the comfort of his friends and family, which means in many instances, at least the pain factor means that you ought prioritize Lana's death or Lana's life over others. But also, I think Lana is uniquely helpful to you. They say like it's a fling and you can always find another relationship, but it's very hard to find other relationships for these reasons, right? You're spending endless amounts of time being a superhero. You often do not have time to go out and meet new people on top of that in many instances. But two, Lana knows you from a child. Who else are you going to know that? She knows how you've changed, which means she has great vocabulary to speak to you. When you have trauma and you cannot speak to someone else because you're a superhero, you can't go to therapy. Lana is the only person who can comfort you in a way nobody else can. So you become a better superhero because of it, as a result of it, because she's able to comfort you in a way nobody else can. Very happy to propose.
Thank the DPM for the great speech. I'll now invite the DLO to close the top.
So, hello, am I audible and visible?
Yep, you are.
Can I confirm? Like from someone?
Yep, you are.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, so, all right, so before I begin, some shout outs. So, shout out firstly to the wonderful organizing committee of this competition for allowing our team to participate with the Reg waiver. Thank you so much. It was very helpful for us to attend. I think the second one is a shout out to the Ateneo for helping me develop in terms of my debating, and to Riva as well, who I deeply admire and has been very, very integral in my growth and my journey. And also to my girlfriend, who's very, very wonderful and is alive. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Two extensions from closing government to clear up this debate, because at that point, there's a very clear wash on romance and love and all of that on opening. First extension. Why does Clark prefer a life centered around a stronger use of his powers rather than more of a normal life, and what this represents in this choice? And secondly, let's assume love is not equal, and perhaps it is not, perhaps the bigger debate. The more important part is coping. Why is he more able to cope with Lana's death Jonathan's death than Lana's? The first and more important extension. Why would Clark prefer a life centered around a stronger use of his powers rather than more of a normal life? Why is this important? This opening debate assumes that it's about love calculations and which one you love more to make the decision, but ultimately this is nonsense. Why? One, both opening teams provide logical and smart, plausible reasons he immensely loves both, and it's really unclear to me why he loves one or the other. Two, this is a crisis situation, and he can't just do the math in his head and all of the logic that all of these teams say and said, oh, Lana did all of these things 1 year, 2 years, 3 years ago, or Jonathan represents this 1 year, 2 year, 3 years ago, and therefore I love one more than the other. Often then, this debate should be judged on what each choice represents in his life, insofar as a symbolic fork in Clark's life and represents an entire change in his worldview and his future. What does Jonathan represent? He represents a life that's early life, for example, for his person. It's secrecy, it's family life, it's prioritizing the personal. But what Lana represents is a dip into adulthood, more of his responsibilities, realizing his obligations, realizing his role into the world, and his Kryptonian identity that he's forced to hide. The problem with OG and the way they deal with incentives here is that, firstly, they just try to argue in the abstract and macro utilitarian sense without arguing what Clark is likely thinking and gets more fulfillment from in a life-changing choice. Two, their only incentive as to why he prefers a life like this is, well, he's the only one that can do it. This is faulty logic, right? Just because I'm the only one that can throw my laptop out of the window doesn't mean I want to do it right now. They have to provide actual incentives as to why he prefers to make a symbolic choice to preserve Lana, insofar as Lana is more likely to represent, for example, a life of freedom, a life of using his powers, a life different from what he's lived before. 4 reasons here. Firstly, Jonathan represents a life of concealment, restraint, and fear, one that Clark is already by the info slide outgrowing. Jonathan raised Clark to be safe. to hide who you are, to stand out and to fear you. But note the influence side states, he's already fighting crime and he already knows why he fights crime because he feels it in his heart that he has to do it. He's no longer a hiding boy in Kansas. He's a man fighting superhuman villains and juggling double lives as what he wants to do. Every time he visits Jonathan, he loves him sure as what OO says, but he's reminded of the part of him that is restrained, afraid, and guilty. He represents smallness in the literal sense of being from Smallville and secrecy. He protects his identity at the expense of others. Even if he loves Jonathan as much as they want, he realizes that a choice of Jonathan is a choice towards secrecy. And this represents the continued emotional weight of not feeling these things that he knows he wants to do. Second reason, Clark feels the burden of global suffering every single day and knows he has to make a choice to answer it. It's not just that he's the only one that can do it as per OG's framing, because again, I explained that's that's a little bit not so clear, right? It's about what Clark is constantly forced to feel and live with. Literally, he is a journalist. He spends his days learning about people who die, who are oppressed, who suffer disasters. And not crucially, the call is put on him. They call and place his symbols everywhere. They call for him to save them from disasters. They call for him to speak out and all of that. He's more likely to make a choice when the world reminds him constantly that it's more likely enabled towards this choice. So he's not just going to make it nebulously on love. This likely weighs on him far greater, and each particular failure is what lays on him far worse on opposition, which is why he knows that Lana's love doesn't just represent love familially, it represents acceptance of this destiny. She knows who he is and doesn't ask him to pull back. That validation is what allows him to finally say, this is who I am, and I'm willing to answer the call of the world in what I need to do. Thirdly, choosing Lana is how he finally chooses himself and not one half of his destiny. Clark isn't just a superhuman and a farm boy. He's Kryptonian and human. His tension has defined his life. Jonathan wants to him to live as a human. OG says that is bad, but they don't explain why that is bad. Because this is part of his identity. He knows that he's part of a planet that's long past, but he still wants to connect with it. He wants to connect with his father, Jor-El. All of these things mean he wants to connect with this part of him that's part of his identity, 50% of who he is. Lana accepts the whole of Clark, and then life afterwards is accepting of the whole of Clark. Not just Superman, not just Clark Kent, but all of him. That's why he's more likely to make this decision with choosing himself as well, insofar as he's more likely to step out of the shadows of both fathers and stop living that life. Fourth reason, choosing Lana is the only way Clark can follow Jor-El's destiny without losing himself. Here's the important nuance. He wants to save the world on both sides. But if he loses, Lana, who's the only person that accepts him while he lives an adult life, for example, when he has Jonathan, he will always feel as if there's a conflict in his life and a tension in his life, but he still wants to live up to Jor-El because one, Jor-El is immortal, guys. He will have them after both of them will die. But two, it's his only connection to his Kryptonian legacy. If he lets Lana die, he will live up to Jor-El's legacy in the worst way possible. He'll become emotionless, could likely pull away from the world, for example, and isolate. With Lana, he can live both worlds, accept his past father, Kryptonian, but also at the same time, live to the world that he wants to live in. Live the life that he wants to live freely and happily and without cold distance to the rest of the world. This, for 4 reasons, is more likely that he's going to support this superhuman life rather than just an abstract calculation of love in this debate. Importance of this argument. 1, it's independent of which person he loves. This argument is grounded on what Clark likely will believe symbolically represents of this choice and more likely to choose in this instance. 2, this is far greater. It's holistic. It's not just love, it's more things. Identity, it's self-acceptance, it's reluctance to face the guilt that he feels every day. He now faces it more under our side. Second extension, assuming love is not equal, the more important part is coping because love, as I both sides explained, you can get somewhere else, but coping is different. Why does he cope better on our side? 1, Clark has internal psychological framing for Jonathan's death, but no tools to process Lana's death. The problem with OG's explanation is that they just say, well, perhaps like Jonathan is old. But no, Clark can also internalize that Jonathan would have wanted them to make this choice, would have wanted him to choose an adult life, to finally freely accept himself as a Kryptonian, to save the world, etc. And more importantly, to be happy and married with Lana and have kids and have a family and have a future. The problem on opposition side of the house is that they assume he prefers to stay in the shadows, prefers to stay behind and not fulfill his destiny. It's more easy for him to deal with the coping because his psychological framing for coping versus on op side of the house, they always stay in the shadows. They always stay with Clark repressed. For those reasons then, propose.
Thank the MG for the great speech. Emma, whenever you're ready.
Perfect. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect. All right. I guess before I start, shout out to Hamza. Thank you for doing this tournament with me. It's been fun. Sorry to disappear for most of finals. Hopefully this speech is nevertheless good. I will take POIs verbally, so just interrupt. I want to start with just a tiny bit of framing about your magical father from another planet. I think that insofar as he is making you make the morally impossible choice of choosing between saving the life of two different people that you clearly love and care about quite a lot, he seems like a pretty fucked up character. Like, I don't actually think that this is the behavior of a normal father who likes his son very much. This seems rather manipulative, this seems cruel, and this seems like the kind of person that you likely wouldn't want to have a good relationship. I'm going to do a couple of things for you today. Firstly, I want to explain why it's obviously symmetrically bad to have to kill somebody close to you or to suffer through their death. I don't think there's a huge difference there. We agree with CG that this is a bit of a deadlock. You probably feel quite upset about this somewhat symmetrically. And then secondly, we're going to talk about the type of life that you have, and specifically why the unique thing is that you're now coerced into a life of vigilantism and fighting evil according to your father's definition of it, which we think is likely to be quite bad. So firstly, as explained, I think your dad seems like kind of an evil guy. And I think that based on that, his definition of like what fighting evil actually looks like is likely to be a little bit messed up. I think it's obviously very philosophically difficult to pin down what exactly it means for something to be evil. I think it's unlikely that in this round we can just fiat in that the dad has like perfect knowledge of exactly what is good and evil. And insofar as he lives on literally another planet from Earth and seems to think that like living a normal life and trying to perhaps fight evil from the shadows or, you know, write exposés as a journalist and call out corrupt dictators and gradually get social change is cowardly. I think he probably doesn't understand how things actually work on Earth and is likely to push you to fight evil in a way that's going to be uniquely bad. So this looks like, for example, engaging in a ton of vigilante justice, probably in the most violent way possible, fighting and executing quote unquote bad guys without any kind of due process or trial or input from the victims of the crimes that they've supposedly committed against them. And I think that this is likely to be done in probably a really destructive way that has very little regard for human life, insofar as your father is already willing to like toy with the fates, toy with who lives and dies, just to get a kind of deal with his son. And so I think you're likely then, insofar as your like resolve to fight evil in this particular way is strengthened, I think that by accepting this deal, you are losing a really essential part of yourself. You're losing your ability to make moral judgments about what is good and bad. And I think this means two things. Firstly, that you are likely to perform actions that are just actively bad for the world, which I think everyone in this debate concedes that you do care about somewhat. I think if your personal life is screwed either way because you're losing someone really important, then probably the impact you can have on the world becomes the thing that you care a lot about because that's your consolation. That's the thing where you say, you know what, I couldn't save my girlfriend, but I could maybe save somebody else's. I can make a difference. And so insofar as you actively make this worse, I think this is probably something that you care quite a lot about. But secondly, we're going to explain why fighting it in this way and engaging in this kind of quote unquote justice is likely to be incredibly bad for you on a personal level. So firstly, why is vigilantism bad for the world? I think firstly, it's just incredibly unfair and arbitrary. You are generally going to be fighting like a single man instead of you pursue the kingpin strategy and try to take out one guy in charge of an organized crime organization instead of, you know, pursuing him through more legal means, addressing everyone that was involved in the situation, considering things like the social factors that could have pushed someone to lead a life of crime. I think it's often arbitrary who the targets are. It's just whoever you happen to see or whoever your dad tells you is bad and deserves it right now. But I also think it's really easy to mess this up, right? It's quite easy to accidentally dispense disproportionate justice when you're using your superpowers in a highly densely populated city. It's pretty easy to accidentally knock over an apartment building, to crash a bunch of cars in your high octane car chase, and to inadvertently then harm a lot of the people that you're trying to protect, the people that live in this city that randomly see Superman like running past their building, destroying their property, in some cases, I think probably causing pretty significant harm, if not death, to bystanders that happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, only to hopefully maybe catch this guy at the end that may or may not have done something that's actually illegal. Furthermore, though, I think beyond like the property damage and the huge amount of harm that you cause by engaging in vigilantism and using superpowers around like normal people that do not have superhuman capacity to resist this, I think you also have a much more pernicious effect on things like the legal system, because insofar as you now create the precedent that, it is okay to take things out of the hands of the duly elected legislatures, it's okay to like take matters into your own hands and just pursue anyone that you think has done a crime and literally kill them or put them in jail or whatever the case may be without a trial. I think you set the precedent for a lot of other vigilante behavior. And I think that you also imply that the system is broken and ineffective and unable to deal with these bad guys in a legitimate way. And this is really problematic because I think it means there's substantially less buy-in to the system. People don't call in to report crimes to the police anymore. Instead, they go and they hope that Superman's going to come by. And this is bad because I think on aggregate, it makes it much easier to get away with crime, and it encourages really negative behavior like extrajudicial killings, for example, because people now feel that this is a legitimate way to pursue their problems. And insofar as you cannot be everywhere all at once unless you make like literal deals with the devil, it seems likely that even if you're able to solve one crime through your crazy superhuman abilities, if 5 other crimes go unreported or are dealt with in a really problematic way in places that you aren't at the time, I think this probably outweighs any kind of good that you can do. Finally, though, I think that you actually are quite capable of doing good as a journalist. It's clear that under the status quo, you already engage in some amount of fighting evil. I think the difference is on your side, you're more likely to do this in a positive way that is firstly tempered by your own moral compass rather than the arbitrary moral compass of a guy that seems to think it's okay to make you choose between murdering your girlfriend and murdering your father. And so you probably choose to fight like better criminals. But secondly, you probably do it in a way that's more cognizant of the way that you were like raised by your human parents, because you still have a good relationship with them. They have an influence on you. And so you don't do things like commit huge amounts of property damage or harm bystanders. And you likely, turn them over to the police at the end instead of just killing them. I think as a journalist, though, you're also able to do good things. You can like expose corrupt politicians, expose the problems of the police force rather than trying to solve it on your own by literally just committing more crimes. And I think that this is probably quite powerful. Like the word is mightier than the sword. I think you're able to, raise a lot of sympathy for the things that you care about. Finally, though, I think it's also just personally bad for you to live a life of vigilantism where you have a secret identity, where you have to conceal this from everybody you care about. And crucially, when you're engaging in this level of like sustained, consistent violence against bad guys, I think you develop a lot of really bad enemies, right? People that are willing to pursue you, that have a personal vendetta against you, that will take active measures to try to hurt anybody that you care about, including any future family, your children, your parents, your girlfriend, etc. All of which means I think you can never feel safe. Like I think the only way to actually feel safe, enjoy your life, is to live a normal life as a journalist where you can fight evil in a much more normal way, incredibly proud to oppose.
And then we move for a great speech, and I invite GovWeb to close out the Gov bench of the debate as a whole. Here.
Hello, am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I'll take PYs through the chat, please. Let's kick CO out of this debate. Not only are they unresponsive to our case, but their case is inherently flawed. They say that you will fight evil in a bad way like a vigilante. The first thing is, you're the one who decides how to fight evil. Like your dad, your Kryptonian dad just tells you that you should fight evil. You're the one to determine how you ought to do it. Plus, you are a journalist, so you have information. You know, for example, the systemic issues that people could face, and you can best adjudicate your actions on that. And even if your actions are currently bad, obviously that means that you want to do it longer in the future so you can be a better superhero to everyone. The second thing I want to say is, how do you know that you're able to process that these things are bad in the first place? You're doing it already. You're just likely to continue it into the future. I'm just unsure as to why Clark Kent will know that his vigilantism is bad. Again, this is an actor motion. But what you do know is that people that you couldn't save, that for example, it's not enough to be a journalist because people are still dying, etc. There's no response to that from closing opposition. Then they have this very flippant argument of how it encourages more vigilantism. I think you'd actually support it because the problem that Clark Kent identifies in general is, for example, there's no one trying to solve the problems. If you see more and more people trying to solve the problems, it'll probably make you happy, especially because they're doing it because of Superman. The important characterization here is, again, Lana understands because she's also a journalist, so she's likely to support you in that feat. Rightfully, this came from opening government. I don't think closing opposition necessarily responds to it. Let's deal then with opening government. The most important contribution is that we sidestep the opening deadlock. First, if love and guilt is symmetric, Clark will likely default to other metrics which to him are clear, something he already knows, like his obligation to help humanity, because that's what his Kryptonian dad and his real biological dad told him he should do. Why is this alternative metric inherently strong? First, from a young age, he was probably indoctrinated to deprioritize selfish interests by these authority figures, and therefore he thinks that this most fulfilling way to live life is to serve other people. Secondly, being a superhuman is risky. At any point, he could die. At any point, for example, he can lose all of his loved ones. So he makes that active choice every day to possibly hurt his selfish interests, to help he'll assert his own interests, and instead prioritize other people's well-being. But thirdly, you know you're the only one that can do it, and therefore it proves as to why you have a unique moral obligation. The second thing I want to point out is we have a second extension. Even if it isn't symmetric, love is hard to adjudicate at that particular point in time. And this is important because what matters to you in the long term is, can I get over this particular point a thing? And that's why your second extension also kicks in, because you explain as to why you can cope better. What is the important analysis we give to you throughout our case, which actually break a lot of the opening deadlocks? The first is, you are currently outgrowing Jonathan, which is like you're currently outgrowing Jonathan. And that's just for a lot of reasons. Like, for example, inherently, you're just growing older. You probably moved out of your parents' house. You have your own autonomy, and you're probably, exercising that. But the second thing is, you actively are choosing to be Superman, which, as the info side states, your parents are against, which means that you probably care about what fulfills your interest more, as opposed to, for example, what fulfills your parents' interest. The second thing that we explain is that at best on both opposition, only 50% of your identity is explored. The other 50% is unexplored. This is important because you already have a lot of memories with your dad. You already have a lot of memories being human. But what is missing to you is memories in being Superman and knowing that you fulfilled the other half of that obligation and that identity that you have. And this is important because if he cares about both, and this is taking the worst case for opening opposition, then Lana is in the middle, because it allows you to, for example, still have a human partner and be human while pursuing to fight justice. And this is important. The response we hear, at least the closest response to hear from opening opposition, closing opposition, is when you save couples or when you save other people's girlfriends, it makes you feel better. That makes you feel worse, because you could save their partner and you couldn't save your own. You're actively envious of every single person that you saved because you couldn't save the person that mattered the most to you. But the third thing we explain is you have tools to cope. This is important. At some point, like regardless of Lana, right? Your parents know that they are at some risk being involved with you. They're likely to tell you or prepare you for death. So, for example, your dad probably told you how to work the farm without him. Your dad probably told you that it's okay and ways for you to move on from him. So you're emotionally and mentally prepared for his death, as opposed to Lana, which is, for example, an unpredictable event, but you also have a lot of guilt from that because you yourself, for example, couldn't do anything. Jesus literally rushing to your house to meet you. But the next thing that we want to explain is that it's actually worse in terms of confiding. Why? Here's the thing. Your dad tells you to be selfless. When you tell let's say your opposition, right? Your dad is alive. You try to tell him about the deal that you did not take. Your dad will tell you should have saved Lana instead. That magnifies the guilt and the guilt and regret that you feel. As opposed to, for example, you confiding in Lana about the death of your dad. She's just more likely to be supportive of the choice that you take because she already agrees with the broad life direction that you are taking. Why do we win the debate then? First, we prove underlying incentives if other incentives are messy. But secondly, we take opening opposition at best, where even if romance is not the most important, there's another moral metric that is the most important to Clark. Let's deal with direct responses to opening opposition. Before that,
Yeah. To get over Lana, you can move to a new city, but every time you see your mother, who you love and see on either side of the house, you'll remember that you repaid her by taking her lifelong partner. This was in our speech. You're not breaking any deadlocks. You just didn't listen.
This is funny. If you move to a new city, you don't see your mom. Okay, let's deal with opening opposition. The first thing I want to explain here is this claim on fleeting and toxic first love. This is important. This is a funny mechanism. If Lana feels so indebted to you because she saved your life, you get to trap Lana in a relationship forever because she's too guilty to leave you. So therefore, you actually have security and guarantee of an emotional partner. The second thing is that in this moment in particular, you don't know that it's a toxic relationship. You don't know that there is a love after her, because what you do know is you see a future with her and that she wanted a life equally with you. Therefore, you cannot internalize falling in love with anyone else, even if it's objectively true. At this point, when he's making a decision against an actor motion, he does not know that. What he knows is a world without Lana. He's mourning. He feels a lot of pain and blame. And that's why it's a particularly powerful emotion. The second thing I want to talk about then is this moral culpability / trolley problem. The first I want to explain is that, again, as we framed it at the start of extension, it's about the perception. Even if omission is not the same as a direct act, he will view omission as the same, and that's the more important deadlock breaker here. What is the deadlock breaker that we provide is that thousands of people are harmed that could have been saved by Superman. And this obviously outweighs anything for a lot of reasons. One, it's just more people. The scale is bigger. Secondly, it is continuous guilt. For example, you can move on from Lana or your dad's death, as opening opposition says, the more the time passes. But every time you look at the TV, every time you see any form of big casualty, you will feel that continuous guilt, which is a longer feeling. But the next thing is that your dad is telling you to raise and protect people, which makes you feel as if it's the stronger moral and the correct moral obligation for you to take. So you actually feel validated by that. The next thing I want to explain is that your dad would have wanted you to save Lana. Here's the important thing. How you can continue your dad's legacy is living the way he wanted you to live. So if he wanted you to be an incredibly selfless person, the way that you're able to do that is by continuing being Superman, so you also fulfills your dad's interest, which helps you cope into the future. But the next thing they say is, this is the POI, right? You hurt your mom. One, our analysis still applies. Your mom probably told you it was okay to sacrifice life. But secondly, every other person you see will also remind you of Lana, so at best it's a deadlock. For those reasons, closing Gulf.
Thank the Gov for the great speech, and I invite the Op-Whip as the final speech to close out the debate. Here.
Okay. All right. 3, 2, 1. I think the main thing in this debate is probably to realize that at the end of the day, Superman probably does care about saving people, but saving people at the cost of millions of others is probably a lot worse than saving people than saving your own family. The way I'm going to go about this whip is I'll start with OG and then go about the rest of the teams. Firstly, the entirety of OG's case is contingent on why Lana. It's like saving Lana is probably better than saving your adoptive father. The issue here is that there are multiple reasons for why Lana is not likely to actually be good. I think OO points out that Lana is probably not the best girlfriend, right? There's a bunch of reasons why OO tells you Lana's like not the best girlfriend. And then CG also tells you, well, you're probably going to live a relatively good life with Lana in the future. You're going to get some kind of coping with Lana. She's probably likely to care about you. Here are a few reasons why this relationship is, firstly, we already know that it's not good, but it's likely to actually be worse in the future. The first thing is that outside of your parents, Lana's the only one that actually knows about your powers. So presumably, if this relationship goes awry, Lana now has leverage over you throughout this relationship. She can use this as a secret. She can tell people, do whatever, like, you know what I mean. She can do bad things to you because of the fact that she knows these things. Because you have an obligation to your father to like hide your powers, and you always felt that okay, you need to hide your powers so that you don't get abused. The difference here is that now if Lana knows about these things, and Lana uniquely knows about these things, and she's the only person that does know about it in your life, then she can then use this to do bad things for you in the future. So because she has leverage, this relationship itself is likely to be bad in the future because it's going to be more toxic. The second thing is that in the info slide, like we already know she was like talking to like Lex Luthor in the past. Like she already close has a close personal relationship with her ex. That this is already going to be an issue for you probably in the future as well. So presumably this relationship is not going to be good. It's already not good, and it's going to be even worse in the future. And it's probably then just better to save your father. Lastly, they talk about how you're morally obliged to care about evil, and that lives are going. There's a revealed preference for you to save people. The difference here is that they will say that you're going to save like thousands and thousands of people. You have this preference to save people, but the problem is lives are going to be lost anyway. The thing is, the trade-off of you spending time with Lana means that probably someone else will die anyway. So even if you do save Lana, there's going to be people that are going to die. So at best, OG's case becomes marginal because you're still going to have a significant ton of people that are going to die. The second thing is also that if you do spend time, a lot more time with Lana, it means that if you do try to fight evil and shit, it means that you're going to take away your time spending with Lana anyway. So this relationship is probably not likely to work, considering the fact that you're actually a superhero, and somehow consider the fact that you're a superhero, and somehow you need to spend a lot of time dedicated to your things. What did NAs tell you? Firstly, NAs told you that basically, basically, NAs told you that your father is likely to be a bad person. Your father is likely to make you do bad decisions, and his perception of evil is likely to be very different than the perception of evil you might have growing up on Earth. Why is this likely to be true? Annie's told you that your father has offered you this option to either save your girlfriend or save your father, which is already pretty fucked up. CG responds to this by saying, well, no, you make your own decisions, and your father's not going to be the one making these decisions. The difference here is that your father is going to be the one that is giving you this option. Your father has the leverage over who is actually getting to be saved, right? So your father's perception of evil is likely to prevail because it's a condition that if you want to save Lana, you will continue to fight evil, and because your father is the one giving you this option, it is likely that your father's perception is going to be the one of the kind of evil that you're actually going to fight. So you are actually going to effectively lose that ability to make the moral judgment that Anais actually talks about. Then she also tells you about the fact that you're going to like the vigilantism stuff is like pretty bad because a lot of people are going to come after you, and a lot of people are going to try and do similar types of activities, leading to like hundreds of thousands of other people dying. Which, considering the fact that you have a revealed preference for being morally good, as the entire government tries to claim, I think that it is probably a bad thing when more people die at the cost of your own superpowers. I think it is probably better that you save your father, you save your adopted father for the reasons that have been previously given, and that your life is then better spent, doing things. Your life is then probably going to be better spent doing things that are going to be beneficial for your own family. Finally, then Anais is also differentiating from our opening, and not just the fact that our like vigilantism is bad, but also there are alternative ways to fight evil. They're not necessarily the way in which your father actually coerces you to do so, right? So on either side, symmetrically, it is probably bad that you lose your girlfriend and then you lose your father. You're losing a loved one either way. But at the end of the day, you're going to be but if you take that option, you're going to be fighting evil in the way that your father, your Kryptonian father wants you to. And secondly, you're going to fight evil there are other alternatives to fight evil, fighting bad things. Now, here's the thing, right? Super villains probably don't come to Earth. I'll take a POI.
So we gave many moral incentives, like you're raised by humans and parents to believe in the good of humanity and choose to morally fight crime even when it's hard. That's what makes CG unimportant, OO's unresponsive, and also ensures Jor-El's perspective is moderated a lot more, making you
Okay, I think that even if you were raised morally good, taking this deal means that you are losing you're going to need to abide by the perception of what Jor-El perceives to be. I think that for the most part, you're not going to be able to save everyone. Even if you're raised morally good, someone will die anyway. And even if you are raised morally good, Anais answers this question. She tells you that you care about morally good things, so you can do this through like journalism. You can do this through like the activism that you can take on Earth itself without putting yourself in active danger, right? So like because of this, I think we take it over our opening as well, because we at least answer that question, that even regardless of whether you are morally good or not, you're still going to be able to do good things as well. Aside from that, I think that we have answered the fundamental questions of this debate. With that said, proud to
I thank the UpWeb for the great speech and everyone for what was a great final. Invite speakers to cross floor, shake hands. I guess if all the people are here, we can just move to a breakout room.